I believe, with the indulgence of all the participants. So Victor, welcome. You have the floor just to make a couple of opening remarks, and then I will get to the panel and also invite them to just do a quick introduction before we delve into the subject matter of the day. Over to you, Victor.
Thank you very much, Barack. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I know we are joining from different locations, and it's a real pleasure to have all of you present. My name is Victor Capio, trustee of KicToNet, and I'd just like to say something small about KicToNet, just for those who do not know what KicToNet does. So KicToNet is a multi-stakeholder platform for people and institutions interested in ICT policy, and the network seeks to catalyze policy and legal reforms within the ICT sector, which is guided by our 4 pillars, that is policy advocacy, stakeholder engagement, capacity building, and research. And as such, we seek to always and consistently provide platforms for multi-stakeholder collaboration, cooperation amongst the different stakeholders within the ICT sector and beyond. As you're aware, COVID-19 affected everybody across the world, and there has been discussions about how we were able to respond to the effects of COVID-19 and look at how we were able to mitigate it within the ICT sector. So we felt it very important to collaborate, to have this meeting to sort of review and examine the issues and the challenges, effects of the pandemic on the ICT sector, and also to identify some of the priority actions that could further be implemented to promote greater ICT growth and inclusion within the sector. And to this end, we have collaborated with the UK Digital Access Programme to have a series of convenings to explore and have greater understanding and engagement on the issues, the challenges, and the effects and impact of COVID-19 in Kenya's ICT sector. And also, we seek to review the progress and priority actions and the measures and best practices that have been adopted by different stakeholders to promote the development of this sector. So we hope that through these events and the outcomes of this event, we shall be able to document and have proper engagement of stakeholders on these important issues and come up with a set of priorities that can further be actioned. And this will be consolidated into a policy brief, which shall be used for further advocacy and also just to document the perspectives of key stakeholders. So on behalf of Grace Gidaiga, the convener of KicToNet, I'd like to officially welcome all of you to this meeting. And back to you, Barack, to introduce Charles Juma from the UK Digital Access Programme. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor, for those brief remarks on behalf of the Kenya ICT Action Network. I see Charles is ready to roll. Charles, welcome. You can make your opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Nice to see and to meet you once again. My name is Charles Juma, as you heard. I work for the UK government and based at the British High Commission here in Nairobi. I lead this program that Victor has just mentioned to you. It's the Digital Access Program. It's a global program being implemented in 5 countries: Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Brazil, and Indonesia. And the program really is about catalyzing what we consider to be affordable, inclusive, safe, and secure digital access for especially the excluded populations. And we hope by doing so, we will have a thriving digital ecosystem. So nice to be here. We are pleased to be collaborating with KicToNet to host this thought leadership forums. I think this is our 3rd forum. We did the cyber hygiene, cyber security, data protection, digital identity, and this is the 3rd forum, which we are focusing around how can we build back better post-COVID. Yeah, so maybe also taking this advantage to, just say that we deliver this through multiple stakeholders, obviously, or to achieve our mandate and our objectives in the countries we are operating, we deliver this through different partners. So we have, for example, global partners, and I'm pleased to see that some of our partners are on the panel. I think I've seen Martha. I hope we'll also be seeing Dr. Mwenga from Strathmore. So we currently have about 5 global partners who are implementing projects that are global in nature, but Kenya as always is always a priority and a focus. So significant part of these projects are actually targeting Kenya. Just to say that our global partners include the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, as you'll be listening to Martha later on, Digital Impact Alliance, the Association for Progressive Communications, British Council, KPFG, the International Telecommunication Union, and we also have several local partners, acknowledging Kictanet as one of our local partners. We also have the African Center for Women in ICT. We also have the Association for the Physically Disabled of Kenya. We have Strathmore University also doing some, project. We have Dignitas and Visca, who are supporting us to, supporting and working with CA to develop the next generation of the Universal Service Fund strategy. Finally, we have Living Goods, which is supporting community health workers around how to use digital platforms, so digital enablement to promote the uptake of COVID-19 vaccinations in 2 counties of Kenya, Kisumu, not Kisumu, but Busia and Isiolo. We're so excited about this. Just to wrap up, for the benefit of those who are joining us maybe for the first time out of these forums, last year as a program in Kenya, we managed to reach through models and some of the models that we were testing last year, we managed to reach over 2 million end beneficiaries, and we're really looking forward to reaching the same target this year, around the same or if not more. So quite excited to be continuing to be part of this. I can see Madam Mercy Wanjau, who has been, our ambassador and champion of the Digital Access Program, wherever she is, in whichever capacity she's acting. So we do appreciate and don't take that for granted. In your capacity as the acting DG, you really made us proud by helping us push through several systemic enhancement regulations. We're so grateful for that. And so without much ado, thanks, colleagues. Nice to be here and looking forward to listening to the great panelists and the team that we have on board. Back to you, Barak.
Thank you very much, Charles. And to colleagues who've just joined us, welcome, karibuni sana. I would like to request you to introduce yourself on the chat, your name and organization. And I would also like to ask and encourage us to tweet. The hashtag is Better ICT in Kenya. So kindly do that for those that may not be able to join in the Zoom call and might be following us through the various social media channels, and most importantly, the Kenyans on Twitter. With that, I would like to take this opportunity to start introducing our eminent panel. I will take the liberty to start with the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Kenya ICT Action Network, Ali Hussein. And then I will invite Mercy after that. Then we'll have Dr. Suarez. Over to you, Ali.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
For me, I just want to say a few words, Barak. I'm today wearing 2 hats when I am speaking to all of you. I am wearing the hat as the chair of the Kenya ICT Action Network and the chairman of the Association of Fintechs in Kenya. As you may well know, what has happened during this COVID period, which we seem to be getting out of. Financial services always plays a key role in our lives. And because of the fact that this country has always been at the cutting edge of fintech, anchored by Safaricom's M-Pesa, this was a time when most of us started seeing the value of having a network that, a fintech network that was working. We saw a major spike in digital financial services. We saw a major spike in e-commerce. We saw a major spike in just generally using financial services technology to transact. I remember the first early days when the lockdown started and everybody was panicking, and the e-commerce players and the players who do deliveries through their mobile platforms, players like Sendy, players like Uber Eats, they really stepped up and sort of bridged that gap. Otherwise, I fear that the panic could have been a lot more than we could have faced. We also saw the regulator, the Central Bank of Kenya, step in and say, guys, we're going through hard times. So let us zero rate some of these fintech services. And that did help. And we actually saw a major spike in usage of especially M-Pesa services. Now, what we should then do now going forward is leverage on those relationships, leverage on the partnerships, leverage on the success and progress that we made in financial services to ensure that more and more people get onto these platforms. The fact of the matter is that despite Kenya's humongous success in financial services technology, we are still leaving a good chunk of people out of the loop. And there are various reasons for that. One reason is lack of connectivity, lack of networks in certain areas of this country. The other reason is, despite the success of M-Pesa and other mobile financial services, a segment of this country still feels the cost for transactions is still high. So, for example, if you are making a transaction and your cost for that transaction is 100 shillings, that 100 shillings really could mean the difference between a family eating that day and not eating. So as we move towards further inclusion, Kenya, by the way, has a very high financial inclusion rate. But as we move further towards inclusion, we need to start asking ourselves, what else? So financial inclusion, you are talking about access to basic financial services. We then now need to move further and start looking at other aspects of financial inclusion. So it's not just about borrowing and lending, it's also about ability to save. It's about ability to access insurance services on your mobile phone. These things are starting to happen, but they haven't hit critical mass. So the onus is on us to look at certain areas of intervention that we can then engage in. And I would like to say that multi-stakeholderism here is a very important component of ensuring that we achieve that. No single player, no single company, no single organization can achieve this together. So let's come together and let's take this thing to the next stage. Barak, thank you very much. Over back to you.
Thank you very much, Ali, for those quick introductory remarks. Next, I would like to invite Mercy. Mercy, you have the floor for a quick introduction.
Okay, thank you very much, Barak. Is it at this point that I should make my remarks or slightly later, if you could guide me?
This is introductory,
Okay.
so just introduce yourself.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you very much. And I'm really delighted to join you on this discussion and a reflection. And part of the reason why I'm so happy about this is because the last 2 years gave us a moment in time that was unprecedented. And because of that, we all got to be involved in the ICT community in capacities that, there before had not been a possibility. And this is a time for us to pause and reflect on what perhaps could we do better? What could we improve? What should we stop? What should we reconsider? This kind of conversations normally will not find a place because people hit the ground running and move to other things. So a big thank you to Charles Juma, who's a key collaborating partner with us at the Communications Authority of Kenya, as he did mention, because I believe out of this reflection, we will be able to pick up even more things that will enable all of us to bring our A game back as we continue in this very commendable job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mercy, for those quick remarks as you introduce yourself. Next is Dr. Martha Suarez from the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance. And Dr. Suarez, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. It's really my pleasure to be here. Thank you to the organizers, Hitanet, and Digital Access Program for working with us and inviting me to speak today. I think the subject is completely relevant. I'm very honored also to be in this session with all the recognized and honorable speakers. What COVID-19 has been teaching us and is still teaching us is the importance of everyone to be informed, to be able to work online, to study online, and to be connected despite the hard situation that we faced. From the DSA perspective, we have seen very briefly an increased demand. I think we all agree on that. And in this case, the fact that we had lockdown, that we had to work remotely, has also highlighted how important it is to have access to the internet. In general, not only to work, but also for children to study, but also for citizens to get information about the health system. And in that context, we find that there have been different solutions implemented. And we think that there are many good lessons that should be taken into account for the future. So I'm very glad to participate here. These were just my opening remarks, and I look forward for the discussion later. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suarez. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome for those who just joined us. Again, a reminder, kindly just post your name and affiliation, that is the organization that you represent, in the chat. We also have a hashtag, Better ICT in Kenya. I request all of you to share your thoughts on the conversation there, or tweet the conversation, so that colleagues who've not been able to join us for this call can also be able to participate effectively. So this morning, our discussion is around building ICTs better in a post-COVID-19 era. And we have an eminent panel made up of Mrs. Mercy Wanjau, the chairperson, ICT Advisory Committee on COVID-19 from the Communications Authority. We have Dr. Martha Suarez from the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance. We have Ali Hussein, the chairman of the Board of Trustees at Kenya ICT Action Network, and also a board member at the Africa FinTech Network. We are expecting Mercy Ndegwa, the Public Policy Director, East and Horn of Africa at Meta, and Dr. Vincent Omwenga from Inspire Africa Initiative, which is one of the digital access program partners from the UK aid. Of course, our colleague Charles Juma has just made a presentation on behalf of the Digital Access Program, who are our key partners in this program. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mercy to the stage to make her opening remarks. She may not stay long, just to alert you because of other prior engagements, but nonetheless, Mercy played a very critical role in terms of our preparation during the COVID-19 pandemic as a nation. I like one term that the chairman of the Kenya ICT Action Network Board coined during that time: COVID-assisted digital transformation. We saw a lot, and we were able to move, or rather to leap through various phases of regulation that may not have been normal or usual if the pandemic would not have been there, as Charles Juma mentioned earlier. So Mercy, I would like to give you the floor to make your opening remarks, and then we shall proceed with the program. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Barak and the KICTANET team. Indeed, when these kind of sessions are held, it's usually nice to actually stay until the very end. And I'm glad it's being recorded, because I would like to reflect on it, even for what the other panelists are going to say. So I'm very delighted to join you here on this discussion on COVID-19, building better regulations, a thought leadership forum. How exciting it is that we are not having this conversation in the space of wonder, in the space of fear and terror, that actually we are coming to the tail end of this. Before I start, is to ask, are we really at the end of it? Or is this the beginning of a new trend where the magnitude may be smaller, but the same kind of character qualities? And what are we going to do about this? So I'll step back to March 2020, February 2020, and the whole COVID scenario started. It was not clear. For many of us, what we knew about was pandemics, was epidemics, not pandemics, because it is possible that right now there is no one in living history who actually had experienced the last pandemic that had occurred. So this was unprecedented, unheard of, and there was therefore no template, or experience almost counted for nothing. But at the same time, the experience of similar issues extrapolated can then be utilized to serve the need of the moment, because it is similar. So what this caused, and very quickly, was for every stakeholder to dig deeper, to really dig deeper and make a call on judgment. This was a true illustration of acting even if afraid. This was a proper illustration of what business school taught us about VUCA. This was it. It was very vulnerable. It was a lot of uncertainty. Things were really complex. There was a lot of ambiguity. Really, I'm not sure that anything had best captured what VUCA was for me until February, March 2020. It also did bring out the value of collaboration and partnership, and you will see in a moment why this was so important, because it became very clear that for once, as Ali has said, ICTs were actually getting to the heartbeat of society. They were driving the economy. Offices were closed down. People had to work in homes, which were normally networked for light duty and entertainment, and they had to do significant work detail at home. Children were sent away from school, and they had to work to study at home. What did this mean? And I'm sure you have come across the quip that is saying that COVID was the CTO that we all were waiting for, because things became catalyzed in a way that perhaps was never imaginable. And this is the situation that we find ourselves in. It also became quickly clear that this issue did not lie with any one player. However, everybody's duty, everybody's mandate was called up, and everybody needed to step up and do their part so that together we are able to achieve more. So moving on to the regulator. What was the call of the regulator at that point in time, handling a pandemic in which what they have to offer, or what the sector has to offer, is really providing a lifeline for businesses, for schools, for entertainment, really for business and commerce and the entire economy. What did that mean? So one of the most significant actions and activities that we took into action at that point was development of regulatory directives. And here, partnership, collaboration, and consultation really came in, because through some colleagues at work, we got some information that when the Spanish flu affected South Africa, South Africa actively codified how it dealt with the Spanish flu. As a result, South Africa today actually has a very extensive codification on what will happen to the economy in the event of a pandemic. However, 1918, technology was not as we know it today. So it had everything except the technology that we were handling. But in looking at the codification on how schools will be turned into hospitals, how hotels will be turned into hospitals, doctors and nurses will be recalled, retired teachers will be recalled, and the like, you get the gist of where that codification was going. And rising on those shoulders, we now developed our regulatory directives that were technology specific, and I'll just mention some of those. One of the first regulatory directives we issued was immediately after the schools were closed, because it became clear that children will lose out, and that while some schools may be able to do online learning, a lot of the computerization and the automation of schools is school-based. So the children have moved back home and left the computers in school. So what does this mean? It means that now the TV and the radio, which is largely widely available in Kenya, will become the new classroom. And indeed, the KNBS statistics of the last census demonstrated that the radio is about 97% available in Kenya, except for a few communities, for which I'd like to throw that challenge here, because for Kenya, as an ICT guru, a leader, it's amazing that we are discussing some of these high-tech things, and at the same time, we have communities that do not know what a radio looks like. I throw that back to the audience here. So we issued a regulatory directive that required broadcasting stations to open up slots and provide for school programming. So suddenly, if you opened the TV or the radio, it became very different. It really, you'd go in and find standard 4 mathematics. At 11, you find Kiswahili is being taught. But there was a reason. It was a call to serve for the children and the communities that were not able to carry on with this learning. So those were directives with regard to promotion of education. A second one was the triggering of a regulatory directive requiring TV and radio broadcasters to issue public service announcements. This is part of the license condition that requires provision of this announcement in the case of an emergency, and a pandemic is an emergency, so that people are aware. And you remember a lot of the advertising that went on at that time about wash your hands, social distance, and all this in different languages. And of course, it found its way into social media very heavily in Kenya. So that was a second directive. And thereafter, it also triggered a lot of conversations with the sector, with stakeholders on what is the challenge, what do you need? What do you need, and how can we lean into each other? This was both at a regulatory level and at a commercial level, because you will recall around that time, a lot of players in the sector were laying off staff in huge numbers. meaning you no longer have a job, you have commitments, you're in a situation that can only be described as crazy. It's something that is unexpected. And our commitment at the regulator at that point is no one must close shop. Let them keep the doors open, let them survive. If they survive at this time, they will thrive when circumstances do change. So I'm glad, because at that time, we really ensured that there was no closure. And indeed, we had no closure in terms of a formal closure or a formal termination of license. Of course, what that meant was a lot of engagements on payment in installments and all this kind of thing, so that the business is able to go on despite the very difficult circumstances. It was also a time that we saw a heavy registration of new businesses, particularly in the postal and courier, because this became the means to access shopping and all other kinds of things. So there was also a growth aspect on that. So all in all, when these directives were done, I mean, at the domestic level and following consultations with our counterparts, it turned out that Kenya was the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to issue these regulatory directives, for which I really pay a lot of tribute to my colleagues, because of the teamwork, the guidance, the wisdom that really ensured that we brought in these directives. There were other directives, of course, that also required the premium content providers to open up their channels, so that in the lockdown, it ensured that I'm able to watch more channels than the bouquet that I actually subscribed for, and perhaps be able to stay at home longer, because really there was nothing else happening. At the regulatory and operational side, this became very clear about the need for an enhanced quality of service, because the entire economy was leaning on the technology platform, and the operators really came out to support the quality of service, and also a time to reflect on spectrum innovations, on how best can we provide additional resources, and how best can we optimize on what we have. And I'm glad to note that on this panel, we have Dr. Martha Suarez from DSA, who at that time supported Kenya. And I believe we came out as one of the leading countries in the innovative deployment around spectrum use and allocation for optimization. And this was actually recognized, I believe, sometime last year. Of course, as I say this, we did see a lot of other partnership and collaboration coming out from other agencies. Ali spoke about the central bank and the zero rating, and many others that came out to hold hands that we would be able to achieve greatly. And as we all know, in Kenya, we never really had a situation where there was a blackout. There may have been surges where there was really stress on quality because of the heavy usage of a very short time. But other than that, we were able to carry on, and business continued. At that time, the COVID-19 task force was set up, which I was honored to chair. And the motto or the spirit behind that task force was, technology is coming to the center of providing a lifeline in society. Kenya is a leader in ICTs. How can we bring these innovations to serve not just the country, but to serve the world? Seeing as this is something for which really we have an abundance of. I'm pleased to report that from the kind of submissions that we received, it was very heartwarming, because we did receive a lot of innovations that were addressing all manner and all aspects of community. Even the SDGs were included. It was also very heartwarming to note the youth in these innovators. And that for many of the innovations, it just required less than $1,000 to iterate, improve, and upscale the solution that they were providing. This is a second issue that I would like to throw out there and ask. Since we picked up, I believe, close to 200 innovations, maternal health, access to education, money platforms, access to labor, access to jobs, what do we do with them now? that we have them. These things were produced for Kenya by Kenyans and for the world. What does this mean as we move forward? So I'll now move to the third part of my conversation and ask, since we are talking about building better regulations, this is a time to pause and reflect, because indeed in those 2 years, a lot happened on the regulatory front. I should have mentioned that on the regulatory framework, a lot of improvements also happened. The ease of doing business came to pass, and we sponsored it heavily alongside others, and the promotion of the e-transaction aspect. And we continue to do it even now, where we are doing quite a bit on the regulatory reform front. So what does this mean as we move forward? What does this mean for Kenya? What does this mean for Africa and for the world? Because indeed, I believe we have a success story to tell from that experience. My first observation is that we are not going back. We are going into a new normal, one that will be characterized hopefully by no new pandemics, but the science has now come out and said there will be small series of epidemics and all these kind of situations. So this to me says that the rubber met the road, and we have to keep the show on the road. We have to improve our systems. We have to improve our value propositions in the sector, because the reliance on them can only grow higher. I'm happy that Dr. Suarez is here, because of course it means that the stretch on spectrum in a country like Kenya, and indeed for the world, will only get tighter. And I think this will call for even more innovations. Secondly, it brought out the issue of the centrality of universal service. I believe Ali also mentioned that. Universal service, the need for superior quality of service, because ICTs now are no longer nice to have. They really are a must have. And we shouldn't go back to square one, having gone through this kind of experience. The importance of diversity, accessibility, and affordability now is quite clear than what it was before, so that nobody is left behind. Another observation I make, and I put out there, is this is the time for Kenya to codify its response to this kind of a situation. We did come up across it, as I said, we learned from South Africa, which had experienced this pandemic in 1918. If we do not codify as Kenya, this will be very sad, because fortunately for us, I believe we might actually be in a front runner space to codify, especially for the ICT sector and from the experience that we saw. Can we have this codified and encourage other sectors of the economy to codify, so that it will really provide a leveraging board for business process continuity going forward, should this kind of a scenario happen? Hopefully not. The last observation is to look at this issue from an ecosystem approach. The ICT sector attracts so many other issues that cannot be quite separated from the core ICT. And I'll just mention some of them for perspective. Issues to do with children and child online protection, data protection, digital identity, electronic waste, which is definitely going to increase even more, the robustness of our regulatory frameworks. This is a very broad ecosystem approach. Some of them are very heavily regulatory, others are commercial, others are civil actors, and others are academia and innovation. How can we ensure that we build from an ecosystem approach? Because we can only be as strong as our weakest link. We also, I believe now, have confirmed once more that we have an experience to share, an experience that can be exported. Because should this kind of situation happen and other countries, our neighbors or the continent experience this, maybe this will be a mark of failure. Because if one country, and indeed Kenya was not alone, other countries also do have success stories. If they did come out with these positive experiences, perhaps they should be codified that others may learn from that and in this way be able to leapfrog. So in pausing on my remarks is to say that really the time has come for us to really get down to work and put this down to record. I'm glad that FCDO is here, Charles Juma, because arising from this, perhaps there should be a carryover that as we close properly, we identify issues that can be put in place to assure more continuity, accessibility, integrity going forward. That even when such an experience happens, that we would not revisit it the way we revisited it with the fear and the wonder in March of 2020, that we will review it from a step up and knowing exactly what to do and redefining what VUCA can mean for us should we ever have to do this. So thank you very much for allowing this opportunity, and I look forward to receiving the recording for the rest of the sharings. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mercy. How I wish you would have stayed on a bit longer. You've really raised critical issues and really pinpointed some of the key areas relevant to this conversation. But having said that, I don't know how many more minutes you can spare to hang around. Thank you. I would like to take this opportunity to invite Dr. Martha Suarez. I think Mercy has really set the platform for Dr. Suarez. It's interesting that never, I think, in the country's history has the importance of spectrum been reviewed or discussed as the period within which we were going through the pandemic. And we appreciate the effort that experts like Dr. Suarez did. So Dr. Suarez, what were your learnings? And maybe sitting in Argentina, how is your assessment on how Kenya responded to the pandemic with ICTs based on the presentation that Mercy has made? Over to you.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciated the introduction from Mrs. Wanju, because she was exactly setting the scene and describing the situation. I also would like to start saying that Communications Authority was very active in terms of handling the situation, dealing with, as she said, like no one was prepared to this type of crisis as COVID-19 came. And, you know, everyone was trying to do their best when we had the lockdown situations. And I think Communications Authority managed to take some of the actions very quickly, and also to monitor the situation and still keep working on innovation and new proposals. So I think that is very important to highlight. Indeed, the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance organizes a DSA Regulators Summit every year. And I have to say that 2 years ago, the Communication Authority was recognized with the Innovation Award, because there were many initiatives and they were very much related to dynamic spectrum access. So we have seen a clear path in terms of activities and actions that would lead to more efficient use of the spectrum in Kenya. So that would be something to start with. Now, referring to the situation, let me take into account some of the information that has been provided by the Communications Authority in their annual report for the year 2020 to 2021. And first, like, despite all the disruptions that were caused by COVID-19 pandemic, it was not only in Kenya, it was a global case. Regulators had to adapt. They faced a situation where there was a growth in terms of traffic and capacity demand. And it was, there was really a lot of stress on fixed networks, because as I was saying before, not only parents, like, let's take a normal household, we had the two parents working from home, and we also had the children trying to attend to school online. And so there was a lot of requirements in terms of the networks. And that is for those that were connected, because we also had the case of families that just didn't have internet access, and it was really critical for them to be covered somehow, because I think one of the key things we saw during COVID-19 is that digital connectivity, digital inclusion was really a way to say that if you had connectivity, then you were somehow part of the society. For those that were not connected, it was really, really hard. And there is a correlation. I think it's not only about connectivity, but there is a correlation that shows that those that had internet access somehow faced better the pandemic. I think that is related not only to connectivity, but to many other social aspects. But I do think that access to the information became crucial for those that needed to take actions and to manage how they would face the crisis. So I was referring to the report from the Communications Authority. So most of the indicators that we have seen have recorded growth. And we have seen that the Communication Authority had to monitor the ICT sector again, and also they had to protect consumers as well as promote universal access to ICTs for all in Kenya. So that is a first very important aspect, how to manage, how to make sure that there was access. I think one of the things that came also here is that indicators sometimes can say like, yeah, we have coverage, we have inclusion, but in this type of situations, in this type of crisis is when you really request the most from the networks, and you really know exactly what the situation is and what the real status is. We have seen in terms of networks growth, there was a huge increase in terms of subscriptions. I would like to refer to one of the tables that you can find from the Communications Authority. For example, there was a huge increase in numbers of subscriptions with different technologies. It's very relevant to see that it was not only for one technology. We had increase of internet services for those that had mobile subscriptions, for those that had terrestrial wireless data internet. In the case, for example, of terrestrial wireless internet data or terrestrial wireless internet, in 2016, there were 47,000 users, and then it grew to 114. So it's more than double. And we also saw similar behavior in terms of fiber. So in Kenya, for example, in 2016, there were 54,700 households that had access to fiber. And then according to the numbers in 2021, there were 439,000. So it was like really, you can see that the growth is not proportional. It's really very, very fast. And I think in that context is where we need to ask ourselves, like, okay, this was the reaction to the crisis. This was like handling the day-to-day requirements, but this is going to continue. It's important to take actions to make sure that this is not the end. It is the beginning for that digital transformation that we understood how important it is. There are many activities to take into account right now. So first is like, the crisis also brought many problems in terms of the economy, not only in Kenya, but globally. So it's important to take actions that will reactivate the economy. And ICT sector has a lot to offer there. ICT sector is creating new jobs, is creating opportunities for innovation. We see a huge potential for AR, VR applications, for an opportunity to transform the way that we have education, not only in Kenya again, but worldwide. In terms of numbers, the Wi-Fi technologies, and let me just start focusing a little bit now on one of the technologies that we think is very important for Kenya and worldwide, is more access to Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi has a global contribution to the global value of economies. By 2025, it is expected to be $4.9 trillion. So it's huge. And that is because Wi-Fi has influential aspects in innovation. For example, now there are many IoT applications. It also has a lot of influence of the transformation of the networks for small and medium enterprises. And there are many other more sources of value. For example, there is also the opportunity to offer broadband access for those that cannot afford connection for their households. Wi-Fi is a key technology for public access. It could be at libraries, it could be at schools, it could be in public hotspots. So that is one of the things that, that should be considered. And also spectrum management can be a key way to accelerate that inclusion and to accelerate that transformation. That again, the idea is not to make it just a response to the crisis, but to continue creating the right ecosystem and making the right decisions that will include those that still are underserved or are unserved. And in that, very briefly, we see some of the actions. Communications Authority made a path for digital innovation using dynamic spectrum access. They have started with decisions like enabling more stakeholders to access spectrum, for example, with technologies like TV white spaces. We know that there is currently under study the opportunity to have more spectrum for Wi-Fi, because that is extremely relevant for citizens. And furthermore, there are more opportunities too for dynamic spectrum access in frequency bands that could facilitate, for example, community networks, or could facilitate the deployments of what we call verticals. So more stakeholders, including, for example, ISPs, to access the spectrum and to deploy their own networks as a way to complement current networks. So that is a short overview, a summary of activities, and well, happy to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suarez. The conversation is just starting. I'll now call on board Ali Hussein to also give us a reflection from the ground. What are some of the lessons that we learned during the COVID-19 pandemic, Ali?
Barak, just to add on to what I had earlier said, obviously one of the key lessons is that sometimes, number one, you require regulatory and policy intervention to make sure that the less fortunate are not left without specific access to financial services because of COVID and because of the high, some of the high costs to access these financial services. The other lesson is to ensure that we now are continuously ready to make sure that we don't leave people behind. Yesterday, I was at the Pan Innovation Week, and I was moderating a panel on what are the emerging technologies when it comes to fintech. And a young lady, very brave young lady from the northeastern province of Kenya, stood up and asked us boldly, asked us, what are we doing to ensure that people in the less fortunate areas, marginalized areas, if you allow me to use that term, that do not have connectivity, that get connectivity, and then are able to enjoy the services that the rest of Kenyans are enjoying, M-Pesa and the rest of them. One thing that I want to also raise that is not necessarily related to financial services is the fact that today, most government services are online through the eCitizen platform. Now, basically what we are saying is that if you're not online, you cannot access government services. So again, I am urging players across the divide to embrace the multi-stakeholder approach. For example, one of the most interesting examples that is still very live in our conversations today is the community networks conversation. Community networks play a key role in ensuring that communities that do not have or have very little access to the internet are served by these community networks. Now, a couple of months ago, Kiktanet collaborated with the Communications Authority to come up with certain interventions from a regulatory perspective, from a licensing perspective on community networks that are aligned to things on the ground. I always like to use an oft-used term in Kenya, which I will translate for Dr. Martha Suarez. We like to say vitu kwa ground ni different. And that simply means things on the ground are different. We sometimes do forget that we must deal with our citizenry on issues that are on the ground. When a young lady like that who stood up in a forum in Mombasa yesterday from Mandera and complained about connectivity, as a country, what are we saying? The Communications Authority, for example, has the Universal Service Fund. And, you know, sometimes we talk about connectivity, percentage of connectivity, 60%, 90% of the population is connected on the internet. But as far as the guy on the ground who does not have access to the internet is concerned, those statistics don't matter to him. He simply is not connected. So this engagement with different players coming together, government, non-governmental, not-for-profit, for-profit organizations, that then come together to tackle problems like this will only make this country better, Barack. So these are some of the lessons. The underlying fact of the matter is it does not matter how good our financial services systems are. If there is no underlying infrastructure to connect those financial services, it's a moot point. But I thank you once again for this opportunity to speak to a great number of people who first, put their 2 hours aside to speak to us. Unfortunately, I will also have to leave because of a prior engagement that I was not able to get out of. So I want to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with you guys, and to also thank Barack for this excellent moderation. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much, Ali. I would like to now quickly open up the floor. I was hoping that we would still have an opportunity to have Mercy on the call, but nonetheless, I'm just opening up the floor to the audience. A number of relevant issues have been raised, and I would quickly invite participants on the floor. I'll take the first raised to either speak into some of the issues that have been raised, or ask any questions that they may have to the panelists that we still have on board. Do we have any takers on the floor?
Okay, Baraka, since it's a webinar,
Yes, Kivuva.
we'll have to allow the participants who want to speak to raise their hands so that we can now promote them to be able to have a mic. And we have Keith on the floor, the first taker, Keith Andere, and if the other takers, they can lift up their hands, then we'll give them the opportunity. So back to you, Barak. Keith now has a mic.
Thank you so much, Barak, the distinguished panelists, and also Kiktanet for this wonderful webinar series that really gives all of us an opportunity, to discuss and, just forge the way forward. And I'm really excited about the topic today. I concur with what many colleagues have shared, especially, how Dr. Martha has really brought out the issue of, last mile connectivity and the power of Wi-Fi, because really data and mobile data is not sustainable for productivity, across the country. Why I, for one, who lives just next to Nairobi City, Limuru to be specific, still, in 2022 do have challenge of GSM network, and I'm a fairly flat area, just barely 30 kilometers from Nairobi CBD. And the ripple effect of this to where we stay is because we don't have GSM, that means that we can't also connect to mobile data. And some of this effect also multiplies to insecurity, because what the thieves have figured out is, for as long as there's blackout, then alternative data connectivity, like those who have access to fiber, are able to call, just the neighborhood, and they take advantage of this. So really, I do agree with you. I think, I strongly support, the use of community networks to a decentralized manner, even to a ward level. We are seeing a lot of, empowerment around, ward development fund, and how I wish that one of the recommendations could be, a digital ward fund that can help us set up Wi-Fi and connectivity at last mile, such as ward, either using community networks or various frameworks that we do have, so that we are able to, allow those who are not able to ordinarily afford data to not be left behind. It's a decade of leaving no one behind, the decade of action. And I think the digital world provides that opportunity, for us to leave no one behind in the spirit of SDG. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Thank you, Keith, for those comments and suggestions, which I believe will be captured in the meeting summary. We have Elvis Ochieng. Please introduce yourself once again and your affiliation, and then you can make your statement. I saw Dr. Martha Suarez's hand. I'll come back to you much later. For anyone else, if you need to make an intervention, yeah, go ahead, Elvis.
Yes, thank you for this part. First of all, I want to say that I'm excited student, also as a Kenyan citizen. My name is Elvis Yang.
Hello, Elvis. We are not able to hear you clearly. Maybe you need to see if you can get proper Wi-Fi, as Dr. Martha Suarez will put it. Or you try to speak again, we see if we can hear you.
So, I don't know, maybe you can still hear me well?
Okay, but try, you can attempt, try.
Yes, hello. You can hear me now?
Yes, try, yes.
So, yes, as I said earlier, my name is Elvis Chieng. I'm a student leader at that is currently based at South. So I'm very much delighted about this thing and you guys will. So the COVID-19 has impacted a large number of countries, turning out even worse than the economy. Because you'll come to realize we as the student of this KNG technical, we are really having a problem connectivity. So maybe if I can take what my brother said, if we can have centralized connection, let's say that we have a partnership with Kiktan, where we can be able to offer more connectivity to technical. So, for example, in my ward, or rather in Zuka ward, most of the residents are not well connected. So if we can have a centralized connection, rather a network or a booster at an institute like this, it can really help things.
All right. Thank you, Elvis. I think we have captured the gist of your request. Wainaina, I see your hand is raised. You have the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm very interested in the submissions. I've noted that one of the submissions was that we had growth in digital money platforms. Now that is of interest also because we've been conducting a study with the International Labour Organization. It's an ongoing study on the use of digital wage payment systems to improve what we call decent work, to especially the seasonal workers and people who are salaried, but mainly casual and seasonal workers. So my question in relation to that will be, during COVID, we had seen money platforms or digital payment platforms grow. I'd like to hear what the current position is on, is it affordable? How is affordability at the moment? Accessibility of digital platforms, especially for low cadre employees? And what is being done maybe to address the affordability issue? Because we've received feedback that especially mobile money, yes, being accessible, is also maybe not affordable to most. So my interest is around access to digital payments that's developed under COVID, and whether there are efforts being made by different players to reduce the cost to ensure that they are affordable and accessible. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Wainaina, for those comments. I think I had seen Dr. Martha Suarez's hand raised, but as I come back to the panel, I'll give her the floor. I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment, but you could also speak to some of the questions that have been raised, especially by Keith and Elvis, regarding the issue of access to meaningful and affordable connectivity in the communities. Over to you, Dr. Suarez.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to reply to those comments because I think they are just spot on. You know, it's like to the DSA, it's right in our heart to make sure that there are new frameworks and new decisions in terms of a spectrum that will accelerate inclusion. If we keep doing things as they were done in the past, we know that that won't be enough, because many of the broadband connectivity solutions are based on market. So if you have market requirements and users that can afford that connectivity, then the market goes there. But the reality is that many are not covered and are not served. So what should we do? And then the position that we have from DSA is that new frameworks in terms of spectrum management that are dynamic, that are flexible, that are innovative, could be a way forward. You know, like if we could keep doing the same thing, we would have the same results. We need to approach the problem in a different perspective. And that's exactly what we are promoting. We think from DSA association, none of our members is deploying networks. What we advocate for is for flexible spectrum frameworks that will create the opportunities for local companies in every country, like in the case of Kenya, for local internet service providers and for many stakeholders to deploy their own networks and to be able to have sustainable models in the long term. So that is a clarification I think was important to make. Now let me come back to the case of Wi-Fi. This is something that should be addressed, and we think that that should be one of the outcomes of this panel. It's like Communications Authority should take actions to provide new spectrum for Wi-Fi. Let me take two use cases in Kenya that are very relevant. One is the enhancement of municipal Wi-Fi. So in general, if we see, according to research ICT Africa, only 10% of Kenyan population lives in household with access to an internet connection, a fixed internet connection. And in the context that if we review why is that situation, is because there is an affordability barrier. So for many of those citizens in Kenya, the public Wi-Fi represents a viable option of internet access. And there is studies that show that about 7% of internet users use public Wi-Fi all the time, 12.9% once a day, and 5.7% once a month. So that is a lot. And then we also have citizens in Kenya that rely on free Wi-Fi spots, additional to municipal Wi-Fi. And there was a study from women that shows that just in Nairobi, there are 31,000 free Wi-Fi spots. In Mombasa, there are about 3,000. In Nakuru, there are about 2,000. In Kisumu, there are about 1,000. And Thika, about 1,000. So this has a great impact for those that are underserved or that don't have the possibility to have internet access at home. And I think that is the reality that citizens are facing every day. And that's why it should be addressed, creating new opportunities, and in particular, giving more spectrum for Wi-Fi so they can really enjoy the best connectivity. Back to you, Barak.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suarez. I know a lot of questions have also been asked on community connectivity, and KICTANET has been running a program in partnership with FCDO on digital access, and this is the local access network or community networks project. And I know Josephine is on the call. Josephine, would you like to speak to some of the issues that have been raised about community connectivity, probably bringing to the fore some of the steps or actions that have been taken so far in ensuring that the unserved and the underserved are actually able to access the internet affordably?
Sure, thank you, Barak, and thank you, everyone. I think it's very good that we are hearing the, like having community networks discussed in such forums. As Barak has mentioned, KICTANET, together with the Association for Progressive Communications, which is APC, with support from FCDO through the Digital Access Program, has been running a project supporting community networks in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. And the model follows sort of creating a movement of community networks in these countries, which include capacity building, also some grant support to build the institutions, and also policy interventions. So during the, I think at the introduction, and I think I've had the chairman speaking about the work around policy, which is very important because up until last year, community networks were not recognized as a model. So the collaborations with CA were really, I think, historic, not just for Kenya, but Africa as well, because Kenya is one of the 3 countries in Africa that has a community networks license. And not only that, it's also affordable because With about 5,000 shillings, communities can be able to apply for this license. I think the pandemic, in a way, was a silver lining, had its own silver lining, because it really re-emphasized the focus on internet connectivity. Before, I think we had sort of gone over thinking about the emerging technologies, but not remembering that at local levels, at community level, there was really still a challenge with last mile connectivity. And so the pandemic sort of helped in terms of spotlighting that. Through the LockNet project, the support, I think, has gone into really thinking through what a successful local connectivity model would look like. And we found that it's not just about setting the infrastructure, but it's also important that the different organizations that are running community networks are equipped in terms of their capacity to deploy the networks, to support, to deploy and operationalize the network, and also maintain and scale. We also find that the information is not just centered in one community networks. Different community networks have their own strengths, and they also have things that they are struggling with. So last year, together with one of the partners for the project, which is Tunapanda, and also Tunapanda organized the Kenya National School of Community Networks, which was hosted by a community network that is also spearheaded by Barack Aheri in Kisumu, and brought together different community networks in Kenya to be able to learn from each other, grow, and also see what are some of the common challenges they face and what would be done going forward. And such peer-to-peer learning engagements are very important because even our colleague who's on the call to hear network has hosted such engagements. And it's great to see that at the grassroots level, we are having exchanges among community networks. I think looking forward into what would be great to see is that even though we have the license, there are still other issues that we need to look at. And I'm happy that Keith brought it up with saying that there needs to be a fund that goes into, or support in terms of funding that goes into supporting this network. So far, majority of them are actually fundraising from development agencies or NGOs, not quite a lot of local funding. So looking into funds such as the Universal Service Access Fund and how it can support both the building of the infrastructure, but also building capacity at community level. This is still a very new concept. We've not really seen many community networks being able to build and manage telecommunications infrastructure. And so there's also need for a lot of awareness and mobilization at the grassroots level. Beyond that, also looking at issues such as affordability for backhaul. We have the national fiber optic infrastructure that is managed by Telcom, but owned by the government. We should also, I think, explore ways of how community networks can be able to get backhaul affordably. And because their impact really goes just beyond connecting homes. A lot of the community networks are also connecting schools. For example, Aheri has connected over 60 schools in Kisumu, Homa Bay, and Siaya. Twahir also in Dunia Moja has connected several schools, Tunapanda, Lanetu Moja. So we are really looking at community networks just not as building infrastructure that would provide connectivity to homes, but also how they'll be able to connect schools, connect if there are youth centers, for example, that could host a lot of the already existing initiatives, such as the Ajira project that the government has been pushing. So quite, I think a lot of support going there would be helpful for the movement. And it's also exciting to see that quite a lot of the ecosystem players are reaching out and supporting the movement. Thank you, Barack, back to you.
Thank you very much, Josephine, for that extensive intervention on what is already happening on the ground. I'm going to pick on a few speakers. Boniface Witaba, you actually shared some comments on research that you have done, and I'm going to invite you to just share with us what it was all about briefly. But before you do that, there are some things, or there are some critical comments that were made by some of our speakers, like Mercy earlier. And one of them was, how do we codify our experiences as a country based on the learnings during the COVID-19 pandemic? I'm going to just ask Victor Capillo later on to speak to that, because in his opening remarks, Victor, you mentioned about evolving this conversation into a policy brief. And there was also a question on what do we do with the thousands of innovation that came out of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think this is another critical area or issue that we shouldn't leave hanging. Probably I'll ask Mr. Charles Juma for his quick thoughts or interventions on the same, and I'll also ask Mr. Mwendwa Kivuva to speak into the same. I see a lot of activity on Twitter. Our hashtag is Better ICT in Kenya, and I'll request you, don't just keep quiet, keep tweeting. And also, I mean, we have the chat room, which is open for any questions or comments that can enrich this particular conversation, and I'll invite all the speakers to also comment in the chat. I'll also be coming back to most of the comments that have been made in the chat, but for now, Boniface, you have the floor, and then I will come back to the next speakers. Over to you, Boniface.
Thank you, Barak. I hope you can hear me clearly. Good afternoon, yes, everyone. Yeah, so just in brief, this is a research that I did with a friend of mine from Singapore. It was during the when the pandemic had just started in 2020. So we understand that schools in Kenya were closed, and okay, was across the world. So, and then the measures, especially by the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, to expand online content delivery, through radio lessons and other platforms, e-cloud and mobile phones. So despite these efforts, I think a study by Usawa Agenda, so I've seen someone from Usawa is in the meeting also, established that 80% of learners were not able to access remote lessons. So this research was just trying to see some of the gaps that were there, like, because we understand the government had plans to start the one laptop per child initiative, which stalled along the way. So we're just trying to see what if the government had implemented this fully. I mean, this would have been an opportune time for this to, I mean, help curb the impact of COVID on education especially. So our conclusion was that at least the government should embark on the project to ensure that learners, especially from marginalized areas, have access to ICT. And this could be, we talked of universal access funds. I mean, if we have that kitty that could be accessed and be leveraged in other areas, I think it should play a bigger role. I've seen efforts by the Communication Authority, especially in the north and east, the northeastern of Kenya, doing similar initiatives. So yeah, basically that was just it. I've shared the link. Anyone wants to read in depth can follow through and maybe reach out for questions. Thank you, Barak.
Thank you very much, Boniface, for that intervention. Before I move ahead, I'll just be inviting Victor to speak into the issue of codification, so that we are not just a talk shop, but we can know the next steps. And for those who might be joining the conversation for the first time, or those that might be coming to know of Kenya ICT Action Network for the first time, I also invite you to visit the website, kiktanet.or.ke. You can check on my handle on the screen for a compendium of resources, that is policy briefs and reports on various thought leadership issues that we have been handling. We don't just talk, we document And that's why the issue of codification is critical to us. Having said that, I will read some of the comments in the chat. I see Mr. Mutinda, Ethnic. You have indicated that it is in the public domain that Kenya Power, having been issued with a network facility provider license by the Communications Authority to provide fiber optic over the existing power transmission and distribution networks across the country. Any comments from the regulator on the last mile connection in the rural areas? I know Mercy has dropped off, but I saw some colleagues from the Communications Authority. I hope they can be in a position to speak into this issue. Again, I see another comment from Keith. Limuru has an ICT hub. The funny bit is that they went ahead to build permanent seats outside the hub because people would gather outside the compound to connect to the hub Wi-Fi. Many are usually young people. Interesting comment. Maybe Twahi, who is on the call and has a number of public hotspots in Kilifi under Dunia Moja network, would also speak into some of their experiences. Twahi, I'll give you the floor after this. But I think just speaking, if you go to the rural areas where there's any Java, most likely you will find a number of students outside the fence or near the premises, also taking advantage of the free Wi-Fi that it provides for its customers. So that just means that indeed, as Keith and Dr. Suarez said earlier, Wi-Fi is really critical in building back better. We have some questions from Engineer Wainaina Mungai. With respect to the digital payments solutions developed during COVID-19, as alluded earlier by Mercy Wanjau, what is the current state of their affordability, including mobile money costs, digital backing costs, etc., and what is being done by stakeholders to make digital payments accessible? And then how did COVID impact their accessibility to digital payment platforms, especially for rural farming populations and workers who earn lower wages? Again, in no particular order, I know Ali Hussein has dropped off, but I'll request my panelists to just intervene on some of these questions that have been raised. So having said that, coming back to you, Victor Capio, on the issue of codification. Comments before we proceed to the next speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Barak. I think what Mercy highlighted was is indeed a big problem. You know, a lot of the responses that we had have not been codified. Basically, we don't have a clear documented strategy or legislation to inform how we can or respond to these types of events in the future. And that's a very important challenge that we have at the moment, because disasters will continue to happen. There could be future emergencies or disasters, for that matter, that we want to deploy ICTs. And it is therefore very important to start considering the possibility of developing framework legislation and policies on terms of how we're able to respond to ICT disasters or ICT risks within the country, as opposed to having a reactive approach as we did during the COVID period. So we need to look at how stakeholders can work together to start thinking of what sort of policy or legislation do we need to develop to make sure that we have that collective response, that we are able to anticipate, we are able to be better prepared and better respond to some of these challenges that exist. I think this COVID took us by surprise, and if it happened, even if it were to happen again tomorrow, we would still be scrambling for solutions, and that is the challenge that we have. And how do we utilize the funds that we have? How do we utilize the various institutions that are doing very different things, as we've heard from the floor and other panelists, is that the interventions are very different, they are scattered and they're fragmented. And we need to start seeing how do we consolidate our approaches to make sure that, one, not everybody, I mean, everybody is, you know, we don't leave anybody behind, especially those in rural communities. And when you see people talking about, you know, you have to stand outside the fence to get Wi-Fi, and, you know, we are not responsive enough to the needs of our communities. And ICTs are very critical to this, and therefore seeing how we can, you know, make permanent these responses by having a documented policy, legislative, and institutional structure. Therefore, I think for me, will become an important priority. And this also will be critical to even aspect some of those which have been, you know, spoken about in terms of cost. What is the cost of devices? Are we looking at measures to ensure that we have accessible devices at reasonable cost, especially of smartphones and computers? Many years ago, I think we had reduced VAT on computers. Is that something that we need to think about to increase access to devices? We have recently seen increases in excise duty to mobile airtime. Is it time to rethink of the impact of these taxes on internet access? Because we are now seeing increased number of people accessing internet. So are we studying what are some of these regulatory measures that we need to start thinking? And I think putting these as priority areas for action, therefore, will become important to increase the number of people with access to broadband connectivity, with access to smart devices, other digital devices, to ensure that they're able to connect and also utilize the full benefit of the internet as everybody else. And regulation and policy plays a critical role in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. Charles, if you're with us, what do we do with the thousands of innovations that came out of the call for proposals that were issued, especially by the ICT Advisory Committee of COVID-19? That's a question that Mercy asked, and threw it back to the room. I hope to also see interventions from the floor, but from a digital access program perspective, what will be your thoughts on this? And I'll come to Kivuva on the same. Charles, if you can hear us, or maybe Kivuva, you can go first.
Okay, Barak, I will go first. And your question is very difficult to answer because we have so many innovators in the room. They are supposed to tell us what they should do, what we should do with the innovations that we have developed. But because it is a capitalist economy, I think only the best innovation, the one that is actually solving solutions in the ground, are the ones which prosper. So you can, so if the interventions that was made is useful, it will still continue to be used even post-COVID-19. For example, we saw there were so many these riding apps where you either send the goods or you buy food online or you get something delivered. Those apps became so many and they are still being used up to today. So if the innovation was useful even post-COVID, it will still continue being used. But despite that, I wanted to just talk about some two interventions that really were key during this period. And one of them was reduced cost of internet, and especially fixed internet and internet bundles. We realized that when COVID hit, the intervention that Mercy was talking about with ISPs and the regulator and the government pushing these businesses to be able to put such interventions. For example, we had a fixed internet, 5 Mbps, which we used to pay at 3,000 or 2,900 per month, went up to 8 Mbps at the same price. And this is a service that was being offered by Safaricom. And then other ISPs had other such similar offers. So, and these were not reversed. Even post-COVID, we still continue to enjoy those fruits. So we have actually benefited from those COVID interventions up to now. One intervention also was M-Pesa charges that were waived. Who did not love sending money or paying bills with no charges? Like you can send somebody 100 bob, 1,000 bob, and you are not charged the cost that they charge. I don't know, it's 27 shillings or something. So we loved those waivers like rebates. And actually banks still are begging the regulator currently now. They are telling central bank to return the charges that were dropped during those interventions, because now when you are transferring money from the bank to M-Pesa, the cost is free, and it never used to be free. And of course, we hope that CBK, the regulator, is deaf and they do not get to hear those calls from the banks to return those charges. To know how this is useful, if you send 10,000, you are charged 87 shillings. When cost of sending 1K was zero rated, we saw people sending 1,000 10 times to save on the 87 shillings. So if you owe somebody 10,000 shillings, instead of sending him the 10K, so that you are charged 87, you send him 10 times, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, because everybody wants to save something. Even now, where cost of transfer is zero rated to charges of below $1, which is 100 bob. For 3 transactions a day, we see some people still send 100 bob 3 times so that they can be able to save on that 10 shilling that you are charging, sending that 300 shillings. So this intervention helped, and we see that actually the consumer is speaking. The consumer wants services that are affordable. So that is more about fintech and how mobile money helped during the COVID-19. Back to you, Barak, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much, Kivuva, for that practical intervention. I have a comment from Twahir, who is unable to speak. He says that one of the problems that community networks face is infrastructure. It would be great to have CA or the Communications Authority formulate ways in which telcos would allow community networks to access towers and counties to allow access to Mulika Mwizis. I think for the sake of Dr. Martha Suarez, Mulika Mwizis are huge towers that provide lighting at community level, if they can also be used to provide Wi-Fi. Having said that, let me come to a closing session or closing remarks, and I'll start with Dr. Martha Suarez and the panelists that are remaining in the room, just to make their closing comments, and then I will hand over the floor to Mwendwa Kivuva to conclude for us the session. Dr. Suarez, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Barak. And thank you also for the explanation about the terms. So my closing remark would be a message to all those that are attending this call today. We think that it's important to have, oh, sorry, there was an echo there. So we think it's important to make sure that different technologies and different solutions can exist and grow, because they can complement each other in terms of providing affordable connectivity and sustainable inclusion models. In particular, we think that spectrum is a public asset that is, if it is very well managed, it can be an enabler of inclusion. And spectrum shouldn't be a barrier for connectivity. So we think that there are many opportunities. We think that the Communications Authority has been making a good progress in, for example, enabling access to TV white spaces. We expect to see more spectrum in the 6 gigahertz band dedicated for Wi-Fi, because that will have a huge economic impact in the country. According to our studies, there could be an economic benefit of more than $20 billion in the next 10 years just for Kenya, if the entire 6 gigahertz band is open for unlicensed access, enabling growth of Wi-Fi networks in the country. And we also think that there are even future opportunities in terms of dynamic spectrum access for mid-band, or policies like use it or share it, meaning that spectrum that is available in rural areas or in isolated areas could be could be available for those that want to deploy networks, like, for example, wireless internet service providers or communities, even with a non-for-profit purpose. So there are many activities that should be considered. We think that COVID-19 has taught us many lessons, and I think like we should really start working on sustainable models for the future and relying on the power of ICT for digital inclusion. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Dr. Suarez, for those insightful closing remarks. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to invite Mr. Mwendwa Kivuva, who is between us and lunch, to make some concluding remarks or closing remarks. I know for Dr. Suarez, it must be 6 a.m. right now. So you're between us and breakfast, but in Kenya, between us and lunch. So Mr. Kivuva, take those comments as a cue, and you have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, Barak, for the opportunity to close this session. My brain is actually burning from all the great information that has come through. It will take a while to be able to process all of it. And DAP is actually operating in 5 countries, and we want to tell Charles that we are proud to be associated with the UK government and the Digital Access Program on the several initiatives that we are undertaking. Barak has reminded us how COVID-19 actually brought something called COVID accelerated digital transformations. And we have heard actually about the several transformations from our panelists. Ali talked about the issues of fintech and banking, how they help to curb the effects of the pandemic. And Massimo Wanjau came with a ton load of information. I know even our rapporteur for this event will have a hard time being able to get all of them, because the epidemic, she said that the epidemic is not over and we may have other challenges ahead. And she talked about the regulatory intervention that Kenya did, and we even got an award for these interventions, thanks to Mother Suarez organization. And we are happy to see that the government of Kenya actually did so much in helping us cope during the pandemic. Thank you, Mother, for being here very early. Mother was here at 5, she is where she is, it's 5 a.m. So you can imagine the dedication. And she gave some very good insights on what we need to do to reactivate the economy, because the ICT sector is creating opportunities for innovation and transformative education. She also talked about how spectrum management is important to accelerate growth and serve the underserved and the unserved, and also the importance of last mile connectivity. And of course, last mile connectivity is that internet that reaches our home or our offices or our devices. That's why sometimes you can go to a location where you don't have access to internet at all. It means there is no last mile in that location. And of course, other contributors, like Josephine talked about how community networks help, and Wainaina and Oitaba, we thank you for your interventions. We thank our panelists and the moderator, Barak, for driving this session very effectively. To Charles Juma of FCDO UK Government Digital Access Program, Ali Hussein, Dr. Mother Suarez, Masi Wanjau, and Victor Capio. And also we thank the KICTANET team led by Grace Githaiga, our convener, who was not able to be here because she was traveling. Thank you all participants for honoring us with your time, for interventions, for questions, and for an interactive chat session. The chat was very active. We will post a short report in form of a blog post on the KICTANET website immediately. And we will also produce a bigger report capturing the outcomes and the challenges that have been thrown to us. And especially the question Barak is keeping asking us, that was being asked by Masi Wanjau, and on all the innovation that came out of it, what are we going to do about them? So those ones we still throw back to that monkey back to the participants and to the Kenyan public. And finally, we have a poll at the end that will pop on your screen shortly. So we ask you to rate that poll so that it can help us in future meetings, so that you can have more productive meetings like this one. Thank you so much to our panelists and all the participants. Have a good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are in this world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kivuva. Again, colleagues, kindly just ensure that before you leave, you fill the webinar poll. And as you fill the poll, I'll read some interesting comments from Carlos Misachi, or is it Carlo, which really sum up the conversation that we've had today. And Carlos says, COVID-19 was both a crisis and an opportunity, but I think the pandemic was more of an opportunity for the ICT sector. I am happy today to see the Supreme Court judges reading from their laptops. Just last week, the Registrar of Political Parties announced that its services will be available online. The other day, the President launched a Microsoft Hub in Nairobi. The government partnered with Google to teach young people software development in tertiary institutions. This means that Kenya is going digital, but with a small population, some people do not have proper internet connectivity and some people cannot afford the available services from the telco companies. Just like Nancy said, now is the time for Kenya to codify, and one major thing to be considered is internet connectivity in all parts of the country. The government should provide free wireless connection to everyone in the country because COVID proved that the economy relies on technology. Thank you very much. I hope we have all been able to fill the webinar poll with that. Once we are done with filling the poll, you can leave at your pleasure. Again, I invite you to visit kitanet.or.ke. Look out for more thought leadership series that are coming up similar to this. And you can also read some of the reports that have evolved out of similar thought leadership series in the past that are available on the website. For now, bon appetit.